Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm your host, Sam Fain, and I am so excited to talk about the family treasure with Shakina, the writer of the episode, producer on Quantum Leap. Shakina, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be with you, Sam.
Yay. This episode is one that I'm excited to talk about for many reasons. The adventure, sort of, pulpy adventure aspect of it. Obviously, the character of Dean and the importance of their moment in particular in the episode. But before we actually get to the episode proper, I would just love to take a moment and sort of hear about your feelings on season two as a whole, especially after coming back, from the layoff with the strike and getting started. And now this is the second episode produced post strike. So what has that whole journey been like for you? Shooting all of these episodes immediately after season one before the strike and now coming back again.
Well, yeah, starting there, it was wild to not get a break between seasons one and two. We had 2 weeks off for Christmas and the holidays, and then that was it. So it was really like I just finished last week. We just wrapped the season finale. So I have been working basically nonstop on Quantum Leap, aside from the strike, for a year and 3 quarters, I guess. I don't know, a long time. But the strike was um, brutal. I mean, it was
Yeah.
really, really hard to be without our community, without our work, and without our connection. So I think everyone was really excited to be back. I was a little intimidated because my episode that I had brought to outline for originally what was going to be episode 209 got tossed when we came back from the strike. So I had literally no time to come up with this episode. They
Oh,
moved me to
wow.
210, but I literally had a week in the room and a week to write, basically. And then we had to have a script to in order to get the episode shot in time.
Oh my
We were on a really
gosh.
compressed timeline, so it was a really different experience from Let Them Play last year when I also got my episode pushed from 111 to 112, but that was because the studio and network and the showrunners wanted to be so sensitive with the material. We knew we were telling a trans story, and it was like our first time out the gate with it. So we ended up taking a lot of time to really massage that story and get clearances on the things we were saying and doing and how and why, and getting support from GLAAD. And this time we were like, we have 2 weeks. We want it to be a treasure hunt, and there's got to be a non-binary character. Go. And I was like, yes, crack. Like, let's get into it. So it was really, I just got to say, like, big ups to Dean for guiding me through so much of it and doing like major rewrites with me on it in the short timeline that we had. And Adrita, who was also producing with me on set and helping me refine as we were going, and Jude Wang, who directed, and the cast. Like, there were so many collaborative components to getting this script ready and shot. So I was kind of like one of those. It was one of those writing experiences where the writing is more like shepherding all the good ideas, not just
Yeah.
like me alone as my typewriter, like making something. It was like, okay, everyone's putting in input and I have to sift and sort and make it happen. And I'm so proud of what we came up with.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I mean, the collaboration is one of my favorite things. So hearing about that process is always exciting.
Yeah.
Now I had heard also that like in the writers' room, and just kind of as your duties as a producer, that you've had more of a role as kind of like, helping to bring everything together in general, like even on episodes that you're not necessarily writing. Can you talk a little bit about your role in that and how that's worked?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think probably every writer's room is different depending on how the showrunners like to work with things. And I know in our show, you, there's a lot of shared labor when it comes to breaking story, which I think is so great. So Martin and Dean have been really awesome with like the best idea will win, and wherever it comes from, will come forward. Um, I think for my personal place in the room and in the storytelling, I think on one hand, I think people really lean on me for understanding in and like a window into a trans point of view, and that are one of our series regulars has in this particular episode, and in Let Them Play, because of the like trans specific themes. I was also given a more, you know free reign to weigh in. But I what I love about TV writing and producing is that it's all writing. Like, the props are writing, the the set pieces are writing, the art direction is writing, the costumes are writing. It's if it's not in the script, then the designers are coming to you asking for clarification, and then you're working with them to make it true to for the script. So it's so much more than like just putting words on a page. It's actually being able to communicate with every other creative decision maker on set and in the production office about what's needed to bring it to life. And that's so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question. What do you think
Yeah.
makes you a good communicator?
Well, I mean, my training, I think, I was trained in community organizing and also trained as a director in the theater. So I'm really good at working with lots of different personalities. So yeah, and also I think there's like, nothing more subversive than an artful command of language. So when you need to know how to shift a dynamic, it's really good to be able to meet people where they're at and like get people on the same page and, rally the troops, so to speak. And that's what so much of this work is. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard like things about me specifically in the working room, but like I definitely am really trying to keep things, aspirational. I like
Yeah.
working in a good environment.
Well, I mean, honestly, like even following you on social media and seeing the way that you do try to communicate on everyone's level, even people that sometimes I think it would be easy to just kind of say, you don't deserve to get that, but it seems like that, I mean, you are open to being able to communicate, and I think that that's incredibly important for any artist, and certainly for anyone who's like you said, a community organizer and that sort of thing. So
Thanks so
yeah,
much.
I don't know, I just wanted to I felt like it might be a fun question to ask and get your take on. And I think that what you said too about being a director in theater, it is so incredibly important because that, I mean, you have to be able to unify everything. Otherwise, you've got a show where something looks out of place and it can just bring everything down, just that one thing.
Yeah, well, there's the aesthetic, right, and how to achieve the aesthetic, and then there is the community and how to achieve the community. And because it's a collaborative art form, like there needs to be a sense of shared investment in the storytelling. And what I've come to learn from my work in theater and film and television is like, even when the money's great, and the money's not often great, but even when it is, the work is still really, 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 really hard. And like, um, and if it's not like the only way to will oneself to do this kind of creative work is because like there's a love to to the making of it, and everyone puts a little bit of themselves in it, from literally from like the grips and the dolly operators to the designers to the star actors. Like everyone is pouring a little bit of their own blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. And so the ways we feel valued matter, and so much of I think being a good director or a good producer or a good communicator, whatever, is making sure that not only are people aligned on what we have to achieve in the creative vision, but also that everyone feels valued. And
Yeah.
so if there are situations that come up when personalities clash or needs converge or whatever, like the real skill set is, and the conflict management around that is like how to get people back on board in a way where everyone still feels like their input, matters and is appreciated. And appreciation is free, you know what I'm saying? So like
Yeah.
that part's easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's it's funny. I'm understudying a show right now, and I think that that is one of the things that our director has done so successfully is made. In my position, sometimes it's an unenviable one to be in, quite frankly, and you don't necessarily get that appreciation or that input. But I mean, she's done a remarkable job of making making me feel included and making me feel like my voice matters too when we're doing table work and that sort of stuff. And so it's just
That's
sort of like
awesome.
to have that seat at the table is incredibly important, and to feel appreciated. Like you said, it's a free thing to do, and sometimes people have
Yeah.
a really hard time giving it though.
Yeah.
So to speak a little bit more specifically to the family treasure,
Yeah.
knowing that you had a treasure hunt, that was going to be a part of the episode, did you have any influences at all or anything that you drew from that inspired the story?
Yeah, so Dean and Martin pitched me on Romancing the Stone. They came to me, they said, we want something that's like Romancing the Stone. We have Mexico Town, we can shoot it right on the lot. and ideally that we'd have like a non-binary character in it. And I loved Romancing the Stone. When I was a kid, I watched it a bunch with my family. It was like a classic VHS rental. But my mind went right away to Indiana Jones. Actually, the original title for this episode was Bendiana Jones, and so I went right there, and also Goonies, because I wanted to capture that like teen adolescent vibe,
Yeah.
and then a little bit of like Adventures in Babysitting, and honestly Finding Ohana, which is so great because Jude Wang ended up directing the episode, and that's like Jude Wang directed that film.
Yeah.
But I knew that I had deep in my blood the reference points for what makes an iconic like adolescent aspirational treasure hunt, like that. I was like, cool, I've seen those movies enough, and I
Right.
I love them, and I've lived them, and everything to Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. Like there's sort of like there's
Mm.
just a way that these stories need momentum and clue finding and misdirects and character clashes and all those things. So that was my reference point, and then the first thing that came to me were the clues. Actually, I kind of came up with the before I even knew what the story was. I started thinking about um, the path well concealed,
Hmm.
snakes underground hide the shamrock key, a turn for every season of Guadalupe's flower, and I started like coming up with this. I don't know why it was Saint Patrick even, the cursed treasure of San Patricio, but like just this crazy mythology that I wanted to feel so Indiana Jonesy and have these really historically accurate but also totally fantastic reference points. And so yeah, it was all that came to me first, and I came back to the writer's room after getting the sort of mandate from on high, and I was like, cool, I don't know the story, but here are the clues. And I like gave everyone the clues and was like, let's figure out what the story is.
That's awesome. I love it. I think
Yeah.
so much of that comes through, and I was definitely thinking of after watching it. The Goonies vibe was certainly one that I picked up on too, and because obviously all the other stuff that you mentioned fits so perfectly, but there was something about it that spoke to me at that in that same way. I think, and the clues certainly had a lot to do with that as well. Speaking of which, I love the clues so much. I love that they're kind of these bad dad puns in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, which works perfectly. I think Shamrock might be my favorite one. Um, um, can you talk a little bit about the idea to have those clues hidden in, the inheritance that was given to the children? Because I just really loved that aspect of it, and the fact that it does kind of come out accidentally, right? That had it, the
Yeah.
bottle not been broken, maybe we wouldn't even know that those clues were there.
Right. I mean, I think the way I imagine the story is that the dad knew that dad was going to give this treasure to his kids, but he had to make sure they would use it right, share it right, like that like it was like this almost like this whole quest is a values test first,
Mm-hmm.
about working together and like making it through this hard journey. And if they could do that, then they would be, qualified to receive this inheritance and be trusted to manage it well. And that's sort of like the fantasy that I imagine is like part of the backstory to it. And I love that because it's like, we go through these hoops and hurdles in life to sort of prove our worthiness when sometimes like um it's all already there for you.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that too, and I think that, and not to jump around too much, but one of the things that I did love so much is that they go through all of this, and then they find the treasure chest, and they open it up, and it's empty.
Yeah.
Well, except for the next clue, really, and
Hmm.
that it was about them finding things within themselves and together, as opposed to getting rich at the end of the rainbow. And I really I did enjoy that a lot, because I think that we do get so wrapped up, especially in this society, in just kind of like grabbing that brass ring and jumping through
That's
whatever
right.
hoops that we have to get to that. And so little time is spent on recognizing that all of the work that we do along the way, helps to inform who we are, and also the people that we choose to call our family. And so I enjoyed that aspect of it a great deal, because
Cool.
well, because I think that it didn't make the family aspect of it just feel sort of like cliched or saccharine or anything. It was something that you had to work for, and I think that
Yeah,
that's something that we lose sight of sometimes. Is like, family's something that you do have to work for. You don't. It's not just something you can take for granted.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's what you make of it. It's like what you put in is what you get out when it comes to family, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Speaking of which, we have three very distinct personalities. Now, obviously, we don't necessarily get to know Nadia too well because
Hmm.
Ben is there instead. But I do love
Yeah.
that we get a lot of information about Nadia through Sarah and Dean as well, which is
Yeah.
lovely
Yeah.
because it's like even if the character's not on stage, what people say about that character brings them to life. um
Yeah.
so when forming this, I had heard that initially there was actually a fourth sister. Is that true?
Yeah. So originally, I wanted to tell a story of like, yeah, these four sisters. It was really a three sister story, and Ben was sort of like witness and guide to these three other characters that we had created. And then in the sort of last minute change, like really down to the wire, night before we started shooting, we had to
Wow.
adjust to make it a two character, like yeah. But I think it was actually the way it was supposed to be all along. Like once
Yeah.
we made the edit to the script the night that before shooting, it was like, oh, this is great. It works so well. It's so fast. It's so clean. And I loved the sort of ensemble of sisterhood that we had created when we had Ben and two other sisters and a non-binary sibling. It really felt like, a whole cohort. But
Mm,
when we lost a sibling, and we condensed the story, it just allowed us to get deeper and closer, to both Dean and Sarah. And Holly and Wilder are like incredible actors, and it just was so delicious to get to see them bring the material to life. So it all kind of worked out, but it was definitely like, oh, and honestly, I will say, I mean, I feel really badly for the actor who we had cast who then was no longer able to come in and do the role, but like in that last minute, oh, we have 8 hours till we start shooting and we have to completely write the script and cut a character. I was like, I love this shit. Like, I was just like, that is TV making to me. That
yeah.
is like what it is. So, yeah.
Were there any other changes that happened along the way? Were you doing any rewrites, like while the episode was shooting?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, uh, so much of the language around Dean's name and identity, we were like doing like live on set and being like, okay, is this a dead naming moment? Should we name this character correctly? Like, what plays right? Should we shoot it two ways
Mm.
so we can figure out in the edit? The whole coming out scene, that morning we had like just published the most recent version of it. I was still racking my brain to make sure it was right, and then I sat with Wilder and with Holly and Adrita Mukherjee, who was EPing with me for the episode, producing alongside me, and we walked through it, talked through it line by line, and made adjustments to the text then and there, right before going to shoot it. So that scene was very much alive until it was captured. Also, I think we were never fully satisfied with the Addison and Tom breakup scene, or like
Mm-hmm.
wedding postponement scene, if you will. It was one of those ones where it was constantly being rewritten until the morning of, because it was so delicate. And
Yeah.
actually, Martin was the one who came up with that, line. I don't know offhand right now, but like, you spent so much time in the past that I began to worry about the future. And it was such an iconic quantum leap line.
Yeah.
Um, but that's always how it is. I mean, the TV writing is just never done. I mean, maybe it is, but not on the shows that I've worked on. On the shows that I've worked on, you do your best with the script, and then you have your sides that morning, and then you get there and you're live, and things change.
Right, right. I know that it's one of the things that Dean had mentioned with Nomads is that it was kind of heartbreaking for him to not be able to do that for that episode. Which I mean, I think the
Yeah,
episode is great, but I can only imagine, to do that work and be prepared to continue that work and then have to stop, due to
yeah,
strike.
yeah,
Um, so, once I obviously want to talk a lot about Dean, and I think that the character Dean, um,
yeah.
and how intentional was that, by the way, naming the character Dean?
Actually, it changed when we cast Wilder, um, and we realized that we wanted to have like a family that was representative of Wilder's identity. And
Mm,
so Wilder is Middle Eastern North African, Mina. And so we just knew that we were going to have to cast the Sarah and then the Nadia double as also Mina actors. And then we looked for names that would work, kind of like an easy gender change name that was still a common Mina name. And so Dina and Dean is
Totally.
they're both like Mina names. And so we were like, oh, this works great. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Oh,
originally written as Gina and Jean
okay.
to be
Okay.
like a yeah, but then Dean is so cool. It's like James Dean. It's like perfect,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And then Dean felt like, you know, our showrunner Dean was like, oh, that's kind of cool,
Well, and yeah, it definitely plays into that moment too when Ben is like, "You look badass," after he hands
you
them
know.
the leather jacket. Um,
Yeah,
so I think one of the things that you brought up too about the dead naming is that obviously Sarah has a hard time, you know, calling Dean by their name, and I know that is something like for me it's easy, right? Sam is Sam, so I've never had to experience that over the past year and a half
hmm
or so, and I'm curious as to how you do approach that in a sensitive manner, because it can be a very difficult thing and it's not something that you want to just do without a lot of thought.
yeah. I mean, one of the things I wanted to show in this family story was that like family fuck up. You know what I mean? Like we try to get it right and we don't get it right. I dead name myself sometimes. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to show like how it can be both hurtful and not malicious, and it can be unintentional, and it can be something that someone's working on and still misfiring, and that we can be gracious with each other, and that there's a journey to go on with any time a family member introduces a new name. Like you're gonna, you know, I want our audience members to be like, cool, I'm gonna try really hard to get that name right. And I want someone else in my position to be like, if they mess up my name, I'm gonna like really try and understand that they're trying, you know, just
Yeah.
building that bridge a little closer, because these things like, I'm not interested in divisive talking points. I'm interested in helping people get along, you know, and
Hmm.
preserving family relationships and kinship and community and friendship. And so I just, there's several things in this episode with the coming out and the naming and the binding, and that I want to empower individuals and families to have more comfortable conversations around these things by kind of seeing them in a disarming way. And so that's what I tried to do with even the dead naming, you know, was just like, it happens. It doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be hurtful. It can still be triggering. It can even be traumatic, but it can be worked through, you know, from
Yeah.
both sides. And so I wanted to show that.
I think you did incredibly well, and it's interesting because Sarah obviously has no comprehension whatsoever. I think
Yeah,
she spends half of the episode just oblivious, and
right.
so it's once she becomes informed and once that bridge is built, it is really wonderful to see to see her call them Dean, and I think that it again for me. One of the things that was also so powerful was the fact that this is a story that takes place over 70 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, that's right.
And,
That's right.
I think it is incredibly empowering to non binary and trans people, youth, perhaps in particular, quite frankly, to see a story that takes place so long ago and be able to really own that statement that, like, we've always been here.
We've
Um,
always been here.
can you talk a little bit about that and specifically with the
Yeah.
episode and setting it in the 50s?
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes it's like, because in the look, I came out in the late 90s, and so I've been at it for a minute, you know, and I still consider myself pretty young, but I came out real young. So, but I've been at it for a minute, and I came up knowing my queer history, learning my queer history, but having to do that through like sifting and sorting through scraps of things that you could find in like old bookstores and like even before the internet and nonsense, you know.
Yeah.
So nowadays, I think because there's so much more conversation around trans identity. And there's so many more trans people coming out because it's safer to do so when we have the language and we have the visibility and we have the platform and the protection. A lot of people think that we are a new phenomenon when in fact, we've been here the whole time. We've just had to go underground and be in the margins and survive on the sidelines. And so part of claiming our space in the present is reclaiming our history and the traces that we left in the past. That's how we get to know ourselves. And I think anyone who might be from like a diasporic community might understand the importance of like tracing that legacy back. And so for trans people and queer people in general, I think it's so important to kind of go back to the archive of history and pull out these examples of who we were. And there's so many records of gender non-conforming people in the 40s and 50s who were out and living their lives and existing in society, and yeah, breaking laws because you couldn't wear more than 3 articles of clothing of the opposite gender, and it was illegal to be gay, and you couldn't buy alcohol and all these things. But we were organizing ourselves in societies and clubs and social networks and relationships and having wonderful erotic and thrilling sex lives, and challenging the heteronormative patriarchy. And we've been doing that for a really long time, really for hundreds and thousands of years, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But this particular sort of James Dean 50s bad boy, the closest sort of like archetype that I could think of is the character of Anybody's from West Side Story, or the character of I can't remember, Jess. No, that's not their name, but shoot, there's a book by Les Feinberg called Stone Butch Blues that has like an iconic sort of like Butch Dyke that might now, I mean, who knows what they would identify as now, but we don't get a lot of role models, so we got to make some new ones. And I wanted to, yeah, to give that gift of seeing ourselves in the past so we could recognize ourselves in the present.
I love that. I love that. I love so much about the way that you articulate it. And I mean, just for me personally, like, I've genuinely learned from you, and I
Oh, that's
appreciate
awesome.
that. I really do.
For
And,
sure.
over I mean, again, just for me personally, over the past year and a half, getting to learn so much about the history has been such a privilege, and the access is there in a way that it has never been before.
Yeah.
I've listened to podcasts, I watch documentaries on streaming, I check out ebooks from the library. It's just so much easier, which I think makes it all the more frustrating and maddening that people choose almost to remain ignorant.
Yeah, but you have to meet people where they're at. And this is one of the things that I learned, and why I think this episode is so important, because this is Quantum Leap. This is like NBC, currently at 10 p.m., but whatever. It's NBC Peacock. It's like watched by millions of people a week
Yeah.
in middle America. And I gotta say, I feel like I kind of dupe them with this episode. It's kind of a sneak attack, you know what I mean?
Totally.
And I love that. I feel like that's kind of my like secret power. But yeah, yes, there's all this information. Yes, there's all this literature and resources and stuff, and still there are people in the dark, some willfully and ignorantly, and some who are really trapped and seeking connection. And like I hope that this episode pierces the darkness, for some people who might not know how to tell their family how they're feeling about their body or their identity, or maybe someone who's not understood someone trans in their life sees this episode and feels more open to receiving that person in their life as they want to be received. And you just, for me as a trans creator, I have to take every opportunity I am afforded to try and, like, I talk about it as my Care Bear stare. I just gotta blast it out and hope that it helps, every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I hope so too, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, with an episode like this, it's national network television, prime time, and the opportunity for people to see this, and to see this scene specifically. I just, I mean, I'm grateful that it can exist.
Yeah, me
One of the
too.
things that I love about the scene, and this is kind of a broad question because it goes,
Hmm.
even beyond the writing and the acting, but just the art of making something like this. I love so much that it's intercut with footage from the project, from HQ,
Yeah.
with Ian and Jen's reactions to what's happening. And I mean, Mason is beyond superb in the scene.
Yeah.
um and I also love so much, what you've given Ben, and the way that he's able to almost kind of coach them in a way, and kind of say like, hey, here's some information, maybe this will help. And I just loved that so much. And you can kind of see the exhilaration. Like Wilder does such a wonderful job of just like, it's like the light bulb moment, and it's just sort of like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
can you talk a little bit about the creation of the scene, and specifically too about kind of intercutting it, back to
yeah.
HQ and getting those reactions?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many dynamics happening at once, and you caught up on all of them. But this idea first that Dean is receiving the gift of language to name themselves, and that is so huge because that's what so many of us lack. And I remember the first time I heard the word trans, and what it meant, transgender. I was like 18, and I was like, that is who I am. That's me. And so, with this non-binary and they them pronouns, like this new option, being delivered to this one person, but really socially and culturally, what we're all sort of experiencing,
Yeah.
it was just so wonderful to see happening. And then the fact that it's Ben getting to do it as an accomplice, which he learned how to do and be last season in Let Them Play. He learned what accompliceship was, and now he's doing it. We don't need to call Ian in. We don't need Ian to jump into the chamber and solve the trans crisis. You know, it's because we have now coached like the cishet man here to like do the empowerment, for this trans person to be there and reflect back their worthiness and offer them the tool of a name. And then for Ian to be sort of like freed from that emotional labor allows them to feel both the joy and the hope that is seeing this young person have this experience that maybe they didn't have or they want everyone to have. And also there's like a bittersweet, you know, there's a tenderness and even I'll say a kind of grief in knowing that it didn't work out that way most of the time back then, and that it's still not working out the way we want it to a lot of the time today.
Yeah.
And so I think I think Mason was keenly aware of what my objective here was in terms of reclaiming our stories and our history, and also the need for all of the non-binary people who look to them as a leader and a pioneer,
Absolutely.
to sort of it's this like complete we see you moment, you know? And we don't get a lot of those. We just don't. Not on
Yeah.
network TV, not anywhere ever. So so I think that's like all of the dynamics that I was trying to weave together in that scene.
Mm. It was incredibly moving to me, both times that I watched it, and it was
Cool.
something that I was very grateful for. And I think that it having the vocabulary and having the language is something that is so important. And regardless of whether or not uh, there's new words or there's old words made new or whatever the case might be, sometimes you really do need someone to give that to you before you're able to recognize it. And I know I did. So
Yeah.
seeing that in action, it was just incredibly touching. And I love the way
Cool.
that the actors handled it too.
Yeah.
I mean, Ray's phenomenal anyway. I mean, I feel like you give him the phone book and it would be phenomenal. But
Yeah.
in this instance in particular, there's just something so beautiful about, I mean, calling Ian his best friend, and
Yeah.
I mean, the whole finishing school joke, that plays over the course of the whole episode is
Yes.
great. But I love bringing it in here. I love, Mason's reaction, because they just like they're loving it too, which is also
Yes.
wonderful. But again, something that Wilder does so wonderfully is that they are, again, that exhilaration, that euphoria over kind of feeling that. I thought that they played that so well. Can you talk a little bit
Same.
about, was there any kind of rehearsal period that you were able to have, or any kind of equivalent of table work or anything, or was it basically just, we got to go, get on, let's shoot it?
No, I had a lot of conversations with Wilder every day on set before we shot, especially with the scene, phone calls, about like what the character of Dean is going through. One thing that we were really so lined up on is that we did not want this to be, I mean, I did not write this to be a trauma story. It is a
Totally.
hero's journey and it is a adventure story. And what Wilder did instinctively as an actor when they came in with this role is they just brought their unbridled trans joy, like from the jump. This kid, Dean, is like hip to go on a treasure hunt,
Yeah.
in their dad's name, and I just think that that's so dope. And to sort of meet this character, from the get go as someone who's like adventure seeking in their body, like activated, taking up space. Like it's so different from the stories that we've seen where like the trans person is hiding or in secret about who they are and ashamed, and their coming out is a is a painful confession. And it's like, no, none of that. This
Yeah.
character is living their life and their truth to the fullest, and their decision to let their siblings in on what's going on with them in their body, like, while, yeah, it's sort of happenstance because of where they're at and the ripped shirt and all that, it is this proclamation of like, this is who I am, and if you want to come on the journey with me, then like, let's go, you
Yeah.
know and I just love that. And I just want, I want trans people who are on the verge of coming out to feel that kind of power when they invite people in to experience them as their true selves.
Love it. I love it. Um, so the character of Sarah, I want to talk about her a little
Yeah.
bit because
Yes.
she obviously has this journey as well,
Yeah.
and I think one of the things that I end up loving about her so much is the sense of humor, because early on she seems completely devoid of that, but
Yes.
she certainly grows into that, and as she's accepting Dean, she has her own moment of this is who I want to be,
Yeah.
and I think it's it's powerful as well. Um, Talk a little bit about the creation of that character, especially again, in 1953, and her
Yeah.
circumstances and how she has to find a way out, perhaps.
Exactly. Well, nothing um like aggravates uh a person more, like a person, like, there is nothing more frustrated than feeling trapped and seeing someone like be free. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
and I like, that's a loaded statement, but in the context of this episode and these dynamics in terms of the patriarchy, what I'm talking about is like, you know, sometimes when we can't battle our oppressors, we like target other folks who are dealing with oppression differently. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I think there's this like, this sort of unseen, you know, maybe nemesis or at least antagonist in Douglas, the husband that we never meet, where we learn a couple times that there is like dynamics that are not cool at home, whether or not that's like abusive or just unkind or unloving or who knows what. It's not a good home for her,
Yeah.
and her kids. And she knows that and she feels trapped there. And I think like then seeing Dean's sort of like what she interprets as wild and fancy free is like, is only reinforcing how confined and trapped she is, and then she builds up all this resentment toward her sibling because of that, when in fact, like, she's really struggling with her own liberation. And Dean's liberation becomes a mirror for her own liberation. And I think that's ultimately a, an allegory I wanted to set up, because I feel that tension with my cisgender sisters, in terms of feminism, in terms of the movement. And I see so many cis women who feel like trans people or non-binary people are like potentially stealing women away from feminism, or like doing something to, enforce patriarchal like stereotypes on top of liberation, and they create a sort of divisive narrative where like trans liberation does not equal feminism, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to say no, 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 my liberation is implicitly and explicitly intertwined with your liberation. And
Absolutely.
and this is true for trans feminine, trans masculine, and non-binary people, and cis women, of all types and persuasions, because ultimately, like, every non-heteronormative, like, cis experience is, like, targeted by
Hmm.
patriarchy. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Ultimately,
Absolutely.
like, and so I know I'm speaking in broad terms, but what I would try to do is distill it into these very human experiences of a woman trying to get out of a unhappy marriage in a time when that was nearly impossible, and then this
Yeah.
young trans mass non-binary person trying to, like, fully express themselves in a time when that was nearly impossible. And in fact, both of those struggles, though are still happening 70 years later, you know,
Yeah.
and we lose the battle when we divide ourselves, and think of these things as, separate struggles. And so that's what I wanted to kind of get at with with putting these two stories up next to each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm so glad that we got to go a little deeper into it because I think, as I was watching it and seeing the liberation of these characters, you can't help but think too, like, and obviously it's part of the conceit of the show that we do have characters that are in, very interesting situations. Even Ben, right?
Hmm.
Ben is inhabiting this woman's space and interacting with these sisters, in her place, basically,
Yeah,
and we see the interactions with the patriarchy firsthand, right, through Ricardo and through Mr. Wells the lawyer, the
that's right.
way that there, and Douglas, obviously, the named but not seen character, and I think that the way that those forces kind of him, Sarah specifically in, and really dictate, the place, or allow she allows it to dictate the place that she's able to occupy and the space that she's able to occupy, as opposed to being able to feel that liberation and really
Well, I
be
don't
her own
think she
person.
even considers she can. I don't think she has the idea that she could even push back until she sees Dean pushing back. It's that
Right.
same gift of naming in a way. And I think that's what we need. Like, sometimes you have to see it to know it's possible. And so, like, what when when you are any person can be struggling for whatever it is they need to liberate from or toward,
Yeah.
and when we see other people, sort of casting off the weight of their own, oppression, however that is for them, however they shake that off and find their freedom, and learn to express themselves and claim their power. We can either see hope and possibility and find activation through that, or we can sort of, like, shrink deeper and feel more trapped and disempowered. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've seen it so many times in my own life where, um, there's like this, something gets ignited when someone feels emboldened enough to take up their space and be their whole full self, and, like, shine bright and give no fucks, and it's like the people around them either got to get on board or get out. And that's catchy, because then what happens is, like, then you want to be like, I want to know what it tastes like and feels like to to be my own fullest self,
Yeah.
and so we get this, like, great double header with, like, Dean kind of coming out to their siblings, and then, like, Sarah stepping in this decision that she's gonna, leave Douglas. And it was so fun. Wilder actually improvised this line at the end of the scene, but when they're walking off together in the sunset, Wilder said, "Thanks for stealing my moment," and it
Yeah.
made it into the cut. And it's so,
Ah,
I was like, we have to keep that in, because
yeah.
it's like these, yeah, it's like we can be. I really believe we can be irreverent and joyful in our liberation. We can have fun, and there are tears, and it is hard work, but
Yeah.
the the hope is that it can be exciting, and joyful. And so we had a little moment to kind of, like, we we tell aspirational stories on Quantum Leap because we really want the world to be that way.
Yeah.
and that's what's so cool about our show. We go back in time and we remake things to fix the past and the present of our show, but we're doing it to reshape the future of our world,
Yeah.
and I love that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that this episode does feel very much in line with, Deborah Pratt's 4-H's, right? Because you've got the heart, you've got the hope, you've got the humor, and the history is there as well, especially in,
Yeah,
in being able to challenge these, patriarchal ideas, especially through the lens of, the early 50s with a non-binary character and a woman who wants out of an unhealthy marriage, and being able to kind
yeah,
of like draw those boundaries and say like, no, I'm worth more than what some man thinks I'm worth
yeah,
in that instance. Speaking of the humor, one of the things that I do love, and obviously Wilder's improvised line it fits perfectly with this too, is that there is this sense of humor that plays throughout the episode, and we get it from multiple sources. One
hmm
of one of my favorite moments, and it has a lot to do with her delivery too, is that early on, when they are first kind of figuring out what's going on, and Addison has just popped in and is talking to Ben, and and Caitlin kind of bends down and looks at the doorway and is like, it might be easier to find the treasure. There's something about that, I mean, it had me laughing out loud.
yeah,
So when you get those moments and you're writing something that has the potential to be funny, I mean, how does it feel to then see an actor take it and perhaps even kick it up a notch and make it even more than what you thought it could be?
well, I mean, I wish I could remember the name that, like, the um Alicia, RDP, and Jude had a name for the way that Caitlin and Ray popped their heads out on the side, the stacked heads thing. I don't remember,
Yeah.
but like we had all these, like Jude kept saying "goonie up," like to make a shot look Goonies, like get in close. But this,
Yeah.
but yeah, these little comedic beats make the dramatic stuff easier to swallow. I mean, it's a spoonful of sugar.
Sure.
Um, so it keeps it lighthearted. And also, like, you see a sibling rivalry, you know what it is. Do you know you're gonna get hit with like a big, trans mass non-binary coming out scene? No, but you know what a sibling rivalry is. You know the tropes, you know the dynamics. So as soon as we sort of call it out and we're like, ugh, that's gonna be a journey, we know what we're here for. Buckle in. We're
Yeah.
gonna get a bumpy ride with these siblings, and so it kind of sets us up for a good time.
Well, I think one of the things too that I really loved is the fact that it's clear that there is that sort of lived-in experience, and there's like expectations that these characters have of one another. You see it from Dean to Sarah, and Sarah to Nadia, even and all across the board, and even stretching out to our main cast, and the way that Ben is sort of like reading or maybe not reading Addison, and can tell that something's up, and Addison's reluctance, of
Yeah,
course, to talk about it. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the episode and the guest stars, which is amazing because there's such a wonderful stuff there, but I do certainly want to talk about the regulars a little bit. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that Addison's story over the course of the episode is really wonderful, and one of the things that's so amazing is that so much happens free of dialogue. It's all
yeah,
just in Caitlin's performance. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because obviously, I mean, that's, you are writing for it, even if she doesn't necessarily have lines for it. So can you talk a little
yeah.
bit about the shape of that?
Yeah, it was so fun and challenging. I mean, look, you get 5 acts, right? So you have a limited number of opportunities to trace or to track a character journey. And when you want to start someplace and end someplace, you have to have these like pivoting moments where you expose the thought process that builds them to that change and gets them to make that change. And when that's your main story, you can be really explicit with how the character goes through that, and that's what we do every week to week with these guest star arcs. But for something like what Caitlin's going through, what Addison's going through in this episode, it's you know um it's kind of tertiary to what we are seeing on screen as the big story. So we need to find these like subtextual clues that link to what she's going through, and how everything that our other characters are experiencing in like a physical acted out reality, she's experiencing in her interiority, and then we're getting glimpses of that through a look, and it
Hmm.
still have to understand that it's affecting her and making her change from this woman who's excited to get eloped tonight
Yeah.
to this woman who's like, maybe I made the wrong decision. I need to get out of this relationship before I lock it down. And
Yeah.
that's a huge shift, but it's also a very human shift. And we had to sort of chart it through the journeys that are happening with our, guest star cast and the lead story.
Yeah.
So we knew we had some moments to achieve that with like the letter from dad is a big one at the end because it's like, you know, um, really tells us like your happiness is only valuable if you spend it with the people you love, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and seeing Sarah, talking about like staying in a relationship because she thought that's what she was supposed to do. So all these moments where like, oh, every pop song on the radio is speaking to me. You know what I mean? Like that Addison is having of like, oh, it's all making me like rethink myself, and no one knows what I'm going through, and that's really
Yeah.
juicy stuff but really hard to script. And Caitlin just did, she can just make meat of a scene with her eyes. Like she can just tell you everything that's going on internally, and
Yeah.
it's not easy to do as an actor. She's really great at that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I love what you said about the eyes because that's, I mean, that is the story that she tells, with her eyes alone. I mean, by the time she does go and talk to Tom, it's clear. It's like, yeah, okay, I have a feeling I know where this is heading. Although that said, what I did not expect, and I was really, in the most positive and best of ways, did not expect was Tom's reaction. Um, Talk a little bit about that moment and especially scripting Tom to react in such a strong way, which feels very real and very
Yeah,
honest, but not necessarily what we always see in those moments on television, quite
yeah,
frankly.
yeah. Listen, there were multiple drafts of that
Mm.
scene, and a lot of opinions about how it should go down. And I will say this episode, we were very blessed to have like a team of very strong women working on this episode. Myself, Adrita, and Jude and Alicia and our AD Maria. So there were all these women looking at this script of this brutal breakup and wanting to make sure that we protected Tom from becoming a villain.
Yeah.
And if he had responded in a way that was more along the lines of like an outburst or a sort of like masculinist kind of hard, um, aggressive, flippant kind of energy,
Yeah.
I feel like that would have really damaged the reputation that we created for the character as a good partner for Addison, and
Yeah.
as a potential partner for Addison. And what we didn't, that would have also like, if she broke up with him and he stormed off, then we'd have been like, well, she was right, because
Mm-hmm.
he's a dick. But the fact that he
Right.
was like, I'm going to give you space and time, and you're going to see that you're actually in love with this other guy. And like, that's just, I mean, first of all, that takes guts
Yeah.
to do, but it's also, yeah, maybe not what you'd expect, like you said, from a scene like this, but in a way, it kind of twists the knife deeper too, in terms of like Addison's
Absolutely.
like guilt and responsibility, versus if he had blown up, then we just would have been like, well, yeah, he's an asshole. So good thing
Right.
she broke it off, you know? So yeah,
Absolutely.
but we had to really play around with it.
Well, it's a wonderful moment for Peter as well because they like just when she begins to break the news, the look on his face is just really wonderful, and
Yeah,
that hurt and that heartbreak and everything that we've learned about the character, especially being a widower
yeah,
and just what he's brought to the show, and not I don't necessarily mean Peter specifically, although obviously he's a part of that, but just the character of Tom. Um, Over the past like 4 or 5 episodes specifically, I
yeah,
feel like that moment it does play so well, and it is supported by what we've seen before. It doesn't feel like it betrays that, and it doesn't feel like it goes to a place where, like you say, it's like, oh yeah, she was right, he's a dick, good riddance.
yeah,
Which I also love because, and I'm not sure how much if at all you pay attention to this, but I know that there's definitely been a lot of chatter, on social media and Reddit and that sort of stuff about Tom, this expectation that Tom's a villain, and that obviously
yes,
Tom's going to
yeah,
turn on everyone, and nothing that we have seen supports that, and I love that. I'm happy for that. let's talk a little bit about the character of Tom and how, especially crafting a scene like this that is so important to the fabric of that character, what you do building off of everything that's come before and seeing that whole shape as opposed to just focusing on, your episode.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to zoom out to see season two in context with the whole show and what we've set up as a love story through time with Addison and Ben. And, you know, um, while that might change and the dynamics might shift and new loves come into their lives, we certainly planted a seed in season one that is like, stick with us for 5 years and see where we go. You know what I mean? With these lovers lost in time. And so in a way you sort of like understand the audience suspicion of Tom, because we hope that people are still ultimately rooting for Addison and Ben. You know, that's what we want people to still, yes, be happy. Ben, find Hannah, like, but we hope that the candle's still burning for that ship. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so that's one to be expected. And then I think, when thinking about scripting the end of a relationship, and now Tom still has more to do, but this scene is so um, final, in terms of
yeah.
understanding what their dynamic is. And that was actually a big conversation piece in the writers' room, because in my opinion, I was like, I think I wrote a line at one point that was like, um, "Are we like breaking? Are we like calling it off or putting it on hold?" And then the other person said, "Is there a difference?" And like we didn't that didn't last, but that idea that like once we had this scene, we know where it's going. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
there was a kind of, it was juicy. It's like for me, like, like we've been following this whole arc, and like I get to write the breakup. You know what I mean? It's the
yeah,
kind of
right,
fun, the
right.
kind of thing. But yeah, like I said, you want to deliver the audience in a place where they feel like it was worth going on the ride, and you also hope that by going on this ride, that both characters leave the relationship transformed, just like any humans in relationships would. So, for sure we're going to see where this takes Addison, and in terms of like how this affects Tom moving forward. I mean, that's one of those things with these characters in our show. There's so many people that you meet whose lives are changed, and you have to imagine what happens next, because we don't we
Yeah.
don't follow them.
Well, I think that is one of the things too, is that like through the course of this episode, there are, it's funny because looking back at Let Them Play, right, you get the big bombshell with Ian having left and what they did and interacting with
Yeah,
Dottie and like all that sort of stuff. And in this episode, I feel like you get multiple bombshells because you get the Addison and Tom breakup, you get Ben writing the letter, which
yeah,
I definitely would talk about, but you also get
so
the
cool.
reveal of Gideon, which we'll get to in a
Yeah,
second.
the big
Let's go.
bad.
Let's go ahead and go back to the letter real quick.
Yeah,
Um,
the Doc Brown letter.
yeah. So when I was speaking to Alex last week for Off the Cuff, and then speaking with, I don't think he'll mind me saying this, speaking with Drew Lindo off the record about some stuff.
Yeah.
One of the
Hmm.
things that I was so interested in and intrigued by was the fact that when Off the Cuff ends and Ben finds out about Josh's, untimely demise, that he doesn't get the opportunity to say anything to Hannah. And then knowing that
Yeah.
this leap is going to be in 1953, it's like, well, he can't say anything to her because she doesn't even know that he's out there. And
Yes.
then knowing that the next episode, The Outsider 211, takes place in the 80s, it's like, well, that's too late. What's he going to do? Can you talk a little bit about the discussions as far as like how do we follow up on that and what do we do and where you came with the letter, which I love. It's a very,
Yeah.
it plays into like Back to the Future, but it also
Exactly.
echoes the leap back in the original series, because that's how
Uh
they
huh.
get the imaging chamber door open. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about what went into that moment.
Well, it's funny. The letter was the only thing. So I had a whole episode outlined before the strike,
Mm-hmm.
and the only thing that carried over was the letter, because we changed everything completely. But it was the one plot point of the season that we knew was going to be this like anchor point, which was that at one point Ben was going to intervene in history and take the risk to change things. and then we were going to track what happens with that, which we will do in the following episodes. And I'm like super excited by, you know, what gets unleashed with that letter and how it works as a plot engine. So yeah. Well, first of all, like, the idea that Ben is pissed that he didn't get to say anything to Hannah when it's the start of this episode, he comes into this new situation feeling unresolved about the last situation. And that is unlike most leaps, because most leaps he resolves and then he leaps. And this one he arrives and is like, there's still unfinished business from that one. So that is like a sort of nagging undercurrent for him, just the way that Addison has this nagging undercurrent the whole episode about like telling Ben about what's going on with Tom. So so it's cool to see how what happens with Dean and Sarah sort of empower Ben to write this letter and Addison to break up with Tom. Like, the leap needed to happen this way in order for these things to play out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really, I mean, the letter, like, it's just the beginning, you know, the payoff is going to come soon.
I have some thoughts. I won't say any of them right now. I'll save that for my solo review, but I definitely have some thoughts, and I thought it was a really cool moment, and I was glad that something happened, because it did feel like, you know, we got this big story in the meantime, and so many other things are going on. You know, obviously the other stuff at HQ is like the threat of Gideon when Rachel calls Ian and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, what's going on there? That moment just felt really nice, and there was this part of me that's just sort of like, oh my god, he gave that letter to Sarah. Like, is Sarah actually going to like
But what she says is like, you're just like Dad. So again, these siblings went on this whole journey to prove themselves to their dad, to get this, you know, and got this treasure. And it was like this, you know, like, Sarah has sort of proven to Ben that she will do this totally ridiculous thing that makes no sense, that is kind of pie in the sky, dreamy.
Point.
You know,
Totally.
so yeah, mail this letter in 20 years. Okay, you know,
Right.
she will. So they just went on this whole quest.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, that is a great point. And one of the things that I neglected to mention earlier, and I want to ask you about this, is that it feels like one of the things that I picked up on is that the father is very accepting of his children, and to the point that he wants them to be empowered. Like, I don't think he wants Sarah to exist in this marriage. I don't think that he wants Dean to have to exist within the confines of, you know, the genders she was assigned. And so, like, I'm curious as to your take on that, and the way that he kind of empowers them to, you know, to fully realize themselves and their relationships with one another.
I think the whole episode, the whole treasure hunt is a quest, and is a challenge laid down by their dad to, you know, show up to their, like, become their, go on this journey and become your best self. It's just like a Siddhartha kind of thing, you know. It's like Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's like it's like every sort of hero call to action. And the fact that this was like the father's, you know, the idea is that maybe he spent his whole life seeking treasure and realized that the most important thing was the family that he was coming home to. And before he gave them this gift, he wanted them to have that same understanding. And so, yeah, I don't know. I love a quest where the real treasures at home. I mean, it's like never ending story. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's all within. It all comes from within. Like, that's the, so I just wanted to, like, you know, nod to that archetype that it's such a, to me, it's such a satisfying story arc. You know, going on the quest, thinking that you failed or that you were unsatisfied, but being transformed, realizing that the transformation that you underwent on the quest was the treasure you were searching for. And then there's the perk of the actual reward that awaits you when you get back home changed, you know? So, yeah.
Well, it definitely feels like a parenting win. And one of the things that I love about it too is it's like, it's almost as though he's saying, I paid a really high cost to be able to come to this realization. And now I am going to give you the gift of not having to pay that same cost. And it's just really lovely. You know, it's that's
Thank
love.
you.
And I really liked it. Okay. So let's get to it.
Let's get to Gideon.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I might have texted some people when I saw James Frain's name in the guest star credits, because I was just like, holy shit, I love that guy. Like, who
Yeah.
is he gonna be, and what's going on here? And then of course he shows up, and I'm just sort of like, you are everything I wanted you to be and more.
Oh, he does not disappoint. Just you wait. Yeah.
So yeah, I know you probably can't say much, but what can you tell me about Gideon and about the creation of this character, and casting James Frain and getting someone like him? Because again, he's superb. I've loved him in everything I've seen him in. I was on
Yeah.
tour with the Children's Theater in like 2006 2007, and it was when the Tudors premiered, and so
Oh,
we
cool.
we would watch that show. That was like our obsession towards the very end of the tour, to the point that we would like instant message, because we didn't have smartphones back then, instant message one another on like AOL instant messenger
Uh-huh.
after the tour ended, to catch up on the show. But
That's
yeah,
so
so I
awesome.
I think he's great. I loved him, as Sarek in Star Trek Discovery recently and stuff. So I would
Yeah.
love to hear more about getting him, and then yeah, the creation of Gideon, and as much as you can tell
Well,
me.
in terms of James, like we knew that we wanted the role because he's the big bad to be legendary, icon status to sort of fulfill like when you as soon as you see him, you gotta kind of feel in your gut that like this is a powerful nemesis,
Yeah.
and James just like radiates this awesome like in this role kind of smarmy Zuckerbergian like power, but that's laid back and dickish, and even that makes it worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Right down to
like
his Chuck
so
Taylor shoes.
exactly. So it's perfect, and the watch and the yeah, it's all just like um yeah, you know who you're meeting when you meet him,
Yeah.
which I love, and he James, like I said, does not disappoint. It's really exciting what Gideon's gonna bring to the table in the next couple episodes. But in terms of writing the character, we again, it's like the season dream, right? We start the season and we're like, okay, well, we know we have a big bad set up. We know that Ian like has gotten entangled with something in order to help us keep Quantum Leap alive these last 3 years. Like this, but who is this person, and how deep um does this connection, embroil us in the fate of Quantum Leap?
Mhm.
And uh yeah, I mean, I just think I'm really excited for the fans to. I've already seen a lot of the theories that have like been popping up on Reddit and stuff, but I'm really proud of how we strung all this together as a writers' room, and
Yeah.
I think it's like really, really, real exciting ride. The final third of the season is just like such a juggernaut. Like you're gonna have so much fun the next few weeks. But yeah, but in particular the role of Gideon, you know, any time travel show like you have to, or story in general, you just have to wonder like what could happen when the technology gets in the wrong hands. It's like
Absolutely.
it's it, and so we have the opportunity to ask that question on our show, and we're doing that with Gideon.
Yeah, well, I love that it's getting explored in a very different way than, say, the classic series did with the Evil Leapers, or even like last
Yeah,
season did with Martinez, which was a little bit different because it was like you can almost ask the questions like, was the technology in the wrong hands? Was it in the right hands but used in the wrong way? Which I think are all
right,
interesting questions. And
exactly.
one of the things that I mentioned in my solo review of Off the Cuff is that as the actually it wasn't a solo review. I'm sorry, JJ Lindell joined me for that one. But one of the things that I mentioned is I feel like as we're getting into these final few episodes, it's becoming increasingly clear that so much of this emotional character driven narrative that I praised, and I think rightly so early on, has also been setting the stage for all of these big plot driven moments.
Yeah,
And I am almost literally chomping at the bit to be able to go back and rewatch the season from the beginning. Briefly, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of put all those pieces together, and especially as individual writers working on an episode? And I know it's collaborative, but still, how do you kind of make sure you don't lose sight of that overall shape once you kind of get into the room and plan that out?
I mean, I want to give a shout out to Annalise Medina, our writer's assistant, who
Mm,
also wrote an episode last season. Annalise creates a board for us and manages this board that has all of our like season goals and objectives and plot points and story elements. And so, in addition to sort of breaking out episode by episode what's happening, in each as each character progresses, and how we sort of structure the act breaks of each episode, we are always revising the mythology that we're creating for ourselves over the course of the season, because you get a really good idea for something in one episode and then suddenly it changes like what's going to happen in sequential episodes, and it's not always planned to a T from the beginning. We have to be able to be responsive to these ideas. So
sure.
um, Annalise's tracking of our season arcs is really a gift, because we'd be lost without it. We'd be like, what did we decide was going to happen? But but then when it comes time for like each writer to get sort of their shot at the whatever element of the story we're crafting, there's a couple things that we always have to keep in mind, which is like, one, we're developing a shared language for how these characters are talked about and how they speak. And so we all have to kind of vibe together on like finding the voices of these characters and watching the show to understand like how this character might speak. And like, I needed to, watch Tom to learn how he would speak and, whatever. So,
Yeah.
so there's sort of like a passing of the baton that happens with the storytelling. But, but when it comes time to like, for these big uh, plot points that are like creating canon, in a way,
Sure.
um, well, there's a lot of pressure because the fans are going to have shit to say no matter what.
Yeah.
Um, um, but also, I don't know, we just sort of nerd out. We get like, when you can tell when you land on the perfect intersection of like drama, action, mythology, comedy, genre, and it's like, there's the idea, and
Mm,
like, let's put a pin in that and make it work. What do we need to do over here to make sure we can get to there? And that's just the messiness of the writer's room. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's so much fun.
yeah.
And yeah, and then you get these little nuggets, you know what I mean? Like, we break our leaps, and we know like, okay, this is the story I want to tell in this time period, A to Z, whatever. But then what we're doing in HQ, it, like, that's stuff that we have to kind of like dole out over the course of the year. And
Yeah.
I got some real juicy ones. I was super, super excited about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that one of the things that has been remarkable about this season, even more so than last season, is that I feel that the leaps and the HQ stuff has just meshed so well, and that the ongoing narrative has been told through these leaps, as opposed to the leaps feeling almost like side stories, or maybe this is the big focus, the leap is the big focus, and then everything else feels like a side story. Everything feels very intertwined, and it's just made following the story such a joy. I've loved it. Speaking of following the story, you get to follow the story in an interesting way for the finale, because I heard that you were on set for the finale, shadowing Chris
Yeah,
Grismer and hanging out with Drew Lindo. I know that
yeah.
there's not much that you can say, but I would love to just kind of hear about your experience and hear your non-spoiler thoughts on what might be in store for us with the finale.
Well, the experience was amazing. I mean, Chris Grismer not only directed the episode, but is the producing director of the show, so he knows the language of our show inside and out, and he is the coach of our crew. Basically, the crew respond to him so well, and he knows exactly what we're capable of achieving and how to achieve it. So getting to shadow him as a director was amazing. I came in as a director on Let Them Play, kind of happenstance. I didn't get to
Yeah,
direct this season because we had a shorter season because of the strike. I really hope I get to direct next season, so I thought shadowing would be a great way to like set myself up for that.
for sure.
um, so that was just really awesome learning opportunity. Also, it was our last episode of the season, and I didn't want to go home yet. I just wanted to hang out, and I love Drew so much, and this episode was such a great episode, and I just wanted to stick around, so I got to hang out for it. It was amazing. The one thing
Yeah.
I'll say about, like, without any spoilers, is just, you know I feel like last year everyone was so excited that we found a way to revive Quantum Leap, and like that was exciting, and it was just like Quantum Leap is back, and it has so much of the original heart, and like it's doing what it always wanted to do. But then we had this like HQ component and this like procedural real time week to week continuity that the original didn't have. And I feel like what we do in season 2 is we like earn that in a really cool way. I feel like now people are going to be like, that's why Quantum Leap had to exist this way. Like we got the how in season 1, and now we got the why. Like this is why Quantum Leap needed to come back, and this is like why we needed to do it the way we do it with the multiple timelines happening sequentially. It's just masterfully done. There are so many exciting threads that are woven together and come together for our season finale, and I'm so proud of Drew for the episode, and I was so happy to get to be a part of it. And it's very satisfying, and I hope that the audiences love it as much as I loved being there for it. And NBC loves to say Ben's journey through time is just beginning, and you really feel that. You really feel that.
I am so incredibly excited for it. It's bittersweet in a way because February 20th, it's over for a while. And then there's going to be a while without anything. But I'm very, very excited, and I just think that what's happened since the show came back after the hiatus already, just in 2 episodes, I think it's incredible what you've been able to do and how the story has been moved forward at this pace that I don't know that anyone was expecting. And it's like those first 8 episodes, the story was told and unfolded in this really wonderful way. And now all of a sudden it's just sort of like, oh, that was just to get you comfy. Now hold on.
Yeah. Shit's getting real for these last 5. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I just also want to say, like, yes, there will be some downtime after February 20th, but like, to your listeners, like, now is the time to beat the drum for season 3, because this is when the studio and the network are sort of looking at how people are engaging with the show and whether or not there's an appetite for it. So I think we are putting out a real good meal. So hopefully the appetite will be strong and people will be pounding the table for more, and we'll get more.
That is my hope as well. I encourage people to obviously stream the show on Peacock and watch it as much as they possibly can, and certainly to write those letters. I'm not ready to say save Quantum Leap yet or anything like that, but certainly let people know how much you love the show, and it all counts.
That's right.
It all matters, because I think that's the important thing. So, one of the things that I wanted to mention just real quick, because we talked a little bit about it off mic beforehand, is the fact that it has been an incredibly emotional time for a lot of the community since losing Matt Dale, and he's someone that I love dearly. And I've certainly just tried to kind of like honor his memory and pay tribute to him through the show and through the podcast. And I know that obviously he's someone that you're super aware of, and it's something that I've talked a little bit about. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of what his presence meant to you and meant to kind of like, the crafting of this show and somebody like Matt and their enthusiasm and their passion for the show and what that means, to you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the heart that we're after on this show is bigger than the show itself. And we have this sort of noble quest of trying to capture an ethos of making the world a better place for others, and putting that in something that's bite-sized and deliverable on a weekly basis. But what that really depends on is the torch bearing that happens after the episode airs, and the ways that people go out into the world changed by Quantum Leap, and paying it forward in the ways that Sam painted it forward and Ben pays it forward, and so Matt was and is one of those spirits who was a torchbearer, not just for our show, but for that way of being in the world. He picked up and ran with the headphone. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Matt picked up and ran with what this show stands for. And he inspired people to connect with that and keep the flame lit, like not just week to week, but for all the time that lapsed between the original series and now and onward. And that's, I mean, for a person to be a mensch, a bodhisattva, committed to making the world a better place is already such a gift to humanity, and then for that person to be so clearly able to point to a source of inspiration and say like this gave me the drive to do that thing. It's so beautiful because again it gives the language, it gives the naming, um, and it's such an honor to be a part of that thing that then inspired this person to go out and make the world better. And I hope, I know that that his legacy will continue to pay it forward, you know,
Yeah.
through this show, through your work, through our show, and through all the lives that he touched by continuing to tell these kind of stories and amplify the need of walking in another person's shoes. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
I love that. He was an amplifier. That is the
yeah,
perfect way, and he was so kind. I miss him dearly, and so anytime I get the chance to talk a little bit about him or share something, especially with people who are making this show that I know he loves so dearly, it's it's good. So thank you for that.
yeah. Well, his
Um,
spirit definitely lives on amongst the writers, and we carry his love for the show in our work and talk about him. And yeah, I hope that you will feel that when you see what we have coming down the pipe.
I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will. Um, one last thing. I
Yeah.
know we've read long. I hope you don't mind, but one last thing that I
No, no,
do want
no.
to talk about is that this episode of obviously is so incredibly important for its sense of inclusion and representation, and being on network television, that's obviously incredible. And well, I think we're fortunate, like we mentioned, to live in a time when there are so many stories that are being told, and access to those stories is better than it's ever been before. However, sometimes the recognition for those stories is lacking, and I think that it's important to recognize that and to talk about it. I often don't necessarily know how to talk about that. So I'm curious, to specifically mention someone that and someone that you've worked with before. I mean, Trace Lysette was
Hmm.
in Let Them Play, and she was
Yeah,
fantastic in that.
of
And
course.
then she was also in a film called Monica, which is just a brilliant, brilliant movie, and her performance is incredible. I
Astounding.
don't have I don't have the
Yeah.
superlatives for it, honestly. Um, but it's been a performance that has been largely ignored as we're in this award season. And I know that awards are something that sometimes people are sort of like, well, they're not everything. But I also think that the recognition that they can give, and certainly the visibility that they can give to stories that are underserved, is incredibly important. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that it has been something that we haven't seen appreciated in the way that I certainly think it should be?
Yeah. It's so hard because you never know if it's like a snub, if it's like ignorance, fear, hatred, if it's like changing tastes and mandates, like, oh, trans isn't hot right now. Now we want to talk about this underrepresented group. And then next year it'll be that underrepresented group, or we'll be going back to this thing, or maybe trans will be hot again, or who knows what. There's so many ways to be cynical about the industry and its mandates and its, reward and compensation systems and recognition systems. But um, seeing through the noise of that, I would say, first of all, Trace is an incredible actor and uh, should be recognized for her body of work, not just Monica, but
For
Monica is
sure.
definitely like the tiara on top of all of it right now, and I hope and know there will be more for her. So if people haven't gotten the chance to see Monica, you should see Monica because Trace's work in it is astounding. Um, what I will say is that trans people, in at least in my business, are no strangers to feeling underappreciated and unrecognized for our work. We are out here because we love our craft and we love telling stories. We also believe in the power of changing the world through the work that we do, and we know that we are shifting culture in a way that is not necessarily going to celebrate us as much as you know maybe we deserve. But but that we are creating these interventions, and I really call them that because we really are shifting culture in a way that like disrupts toxicity and allows for new possibility. And Trace, like I said, has done that in everything that she's put out, in her music and in her acting. But yeah, it's it can feel a little thankless sometimes, and that's when I'll say that things like messages, DMs, tweets, whatever, like those things really matter. Like they really help when you hear from the fans and you hear from a trans kid somewhere or a parent of a trans kid somewhere, and you get these messages that like this really saved me or changed me or helped me. Then it's like, okay, I didn't get the award nomination, but I'm hearing from real people that I made their lives better.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. And I know that Trace is getting that, and I hope she gets a lot more of that. I hope she gets the awards and the cash and the jobs, and God
For
willing, me
sure.
too. You know what I'm saying? I
Yes,
want all that
yes.
too. But in the meantime, what makes me able to get back up and go back to work when I don't get the nod, when I don't get the acclaim, is the satisfaction in knowing that I'm really changing the world, you
Yeah.
know, like even if it is one life at a time, and oftentimes it's much more than that.
Yeah.
That's something I can say. And like, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not saving lives in a traditional way, but I am fully aware by the feedback that I get from the people who engage with the things that I create that I'm making the world a better place for them. And that matters. And so I would say, if Trace has made the world a better place for you, you should let her know, because not enough people are letting her know. And I'll
Yeah.
take some of that too if you want to send it my way. It's
Hell
always
yeah.
nice.
What could be more quantum leap than that? Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because it was something that I was interested in hearing, and I really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
for what it's worth, like I said, I mean, you've had an impact on me personally, and I'm grateful for that. And like the sign says,
Yeah.
you are magic. You are magic.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
And what, at the risk of being reductive, because I feel like the answer to
Yeah.
this exists throughout the last hour plus of conversation we've had, but it's a question I've started asking people. What inspires you?
I am inspired by I'm inspired by the possibility of becoming the person I've always dreamed of being. And so I chase that dream a lot, because the person I always dreamed of being is someone who helps save the world. And so, yeah, and has a good time doing it. You know what I mean? And so the inspiration is sort of built into the whole project, because it's like I want to be someone who's inspired. So, and who inspires others. So, in order to do that, I have to keep doing that. And then it
Mhm.
helps feed itself to keep going, I guess. I
I love
hope that
that.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It reminds me of that
Yeah.
that David Bowie quote. Getting older is the extraordinary process whereby you become the person you always should have been, or were always meant to be, something like that.
Yeah. God
Um,
bless him. Okay, great. I love that. Yes, David
right?
Bowie. Thank you. I'll
Yeah.
take it. Yeah.
um, well, Shakina, thank you so much. I really, really can't tell you how much
Thank you, Sam.
I'm just so thrilled to be able to have this conversation, to have you on the show again, to see your work again. I can't wait to see more.
Thank you.
I think
Same.
whether it's quantum leap or not, whatever you're working on, that's one of the things that I'm so grateful for this show too, is the fact that I feel like, I mean, I want the show to last 10 years, but whenever that happens, I will certainly be following everyone that's working on it, because I just feel like there's been so much wonderful work, and thank you for being a part of that, and thank you for coming on today to talk about the family treasure.
For sure, Sam. Thanks for having me. Such a great time with you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, fellow travelers, I'm going to get out of here, but thank you so much for listening. Make sure you're watching Quantum Leap, streaming Quantum Leap, and, write those comments. Send those comments to Shakina. Send those comments to Trace. Send those comments to NBC, to the network, to anyone that's working on this show. Tell them what you think of it, and tell them how much it's meant to you, because I know it definitely means a lot to me. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, stay safe out there, and always, always leap responsibly.